Edward, a 35-year-old man, millionaire and heir to a vast fortune, was used to living a life of luxury and exclusivity. He traveled the world on private jets, attended the most exclusive events, and rarely went unnoticed anywhere he went. His life was marked by excesses, meetings with big businessmen, and constant appearances in the media. However, despite all the glitter and ostentation, Eduardo felt that something was missing. There was a void inside him that all the money in the world couldn't seem to fill. One day, on a random morning, Eduardo decided to do something unusual for a man of his position. He woke up with an inexplicable desire to disconnect from his luxurious routine and decided to walk aimlessly through the streets of a small town where he was staying for business. Eduardo, in jeans and a t-shirt, without his expensive clothes and usual air of arrogance, felt anonymous. Walking aimlessly, he came across a modest corner cafe, a simple and welcoming place that contrasted with the environments he frequented. As soon as he entered the cafe, the peaceful sounds of conversation and the smell of fresh coffee enveloped him. He went to a table in the corner and was soon served by a young waitress named Camila. Upon seeing her, Eduardo was momentarily paralyzed. Not only was she beautiful, but there was something about her presence that intrigued him deeply. Camila was simple, with a welcoming smile and eyes that seemed to carry stories and wisdom beyond her years. She approached with a notepad in her hand and a smile on her lips. "Good morning, what do you want?" he asked, not recognizing who he was. Camila, unlike anyone Eduardo was used to meeting, didn't seem impressed by his sophisticated air, nor did she try to please him in an artificial way. She treated him like any other client, with simplicity and respect, something Eduardo hadn't experienced in years. He ordered a coffee, and as he watched her walk away, he felt an inexplicable connection. There was a growing curiosity about that woman, who seemed to live in a world completely different from his, but who, somehow, awakened something dormant inside him. While Camila served other customers, Eduardo watched her from afar, trying to understand why he was so attracted to that ordinary waitress. She didn't have the artificial mannerisms of the women he used to meet at galas and luxury events. Instead, her simplicity and authenticity were like a breath of fresh air in her meticulously controlled and superficial life. He felt like he needed to get to know her better, find out who she really was. The coffee Eduardo ordered was served with a small gesture of kindness. Camila placed the cup on the table, smiled slightly and said, "I hope you like it. Anything, I'm here." Without knowing it, she had already captured the interest of one of the richest men in the country. Eduardo, in turn, felt an uncontrollable desire to keep returning to that cafe. Something was about to change in his life, and, although he didn't know exactly what, he felt that Camila was a fundamental part of this upcoming transformation. In the days following the initial meeting, Edward couldn't take it off Camila of the head. It was a completely new feeling for him, someone who was used to having everything he wanted and controlling every situation around him. Camila, with her simplicity and genuineness, stirred something deep inside him. He began to wonder what her life would be like, so far from the extravagant world he knew. Eduardo decided he needed to see her again, but he knew he couldn't just show up and try to impress her with his wealth. He wanted to really get to know her, without the barriers that money usually imposed on their relationships. On the third day after the first meeting, Eduardo returned to the cafe. This time, he was more self-aware, almost anxious, an unusual feeling for someone used to having everything under control. When he entered the cafe, his eyes immediately looked for Camila, who was serving other customers with the same kindness and lightness as always. When she saw him enter, she smiled, recognizing him as the customer from the previous cafe, but without any trace of excitement or surprise, which, once again, surprised him. Eduardo sat at the same table and waited, feeling a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Camila approached Eduardo with the same warm smile as before. "Back so soon?" she joked as she took your order. Eduardo, trying to keep the conversation light, replied, "The coffee here is very good, and the atmosphere is even better." She laughed discreetly, not realizing how much her presence affected him. To Camila, Eduardo was just another polite customer, someone who seemed different from the others in some way, but still, she had no idea who he really was. This lack of recognition was a relief for Eduardo, who, for the first time in a long time, felt seen for who he was and not for what he had. As the days passed, Eduardo began to visit the cafe regularly. He and Camila exchanged casual conversations about the weather, coffee, and life's little trivia, but there was a growing connection between them. Eduardo, always discreet, never mentioned his fortune or his life of luxury. He wanted to maintain the image of an ordinary man, interested in meeting the woman who had somehow entered his heart. Camila, on the other hand, saw Eduardo as someone interesting, but his life was simple and centered on work. She had dreams and ambitions, but she never imagined herself being part of the world of wealth that Eduardo secretly inhabited. One day, while they were talking, Camila mentioned that she was saving up to take an interior design course, a dream she had had for years, but which still seemed distant due to financial difficulties. Eduardo listened carefully, resisting the urge to offer immediate help, something he did instinctively with everyone around him. This time, he knew he couldn't solve Camila's problems with money. He was beginning to realize that if he really wanted something genuine with her, he would need to earn her trust and respect in a different way. "You'll make it," Eduardo said with conviction. "You have a determination that few people have." That sentence touched Camila in an unexpected way. She was used to working hard, without expecting recognition, and hearing that from Eduardo made her look at him in a new way. Although she wasn't fully aware of his growing interest, Camila felt that there was something special about the man who, for no apparent reason, kept coming back to the cafe. Maybe there was more to Eduardo than met the eye, but Camila, until then, hadn't allowed herself to think of it as anything more than a potential friendship. However, there was a subtle attraction between the two, something they both felt but were still hesitant to admit. Eduardo, in turn, knew he was approaching a critical point. He wanted to know her more deeply, but he knew that, at some point, he would need to reveal who he really was. Camila began to stir feelings that he hadn't experienced in years. He wondered what would happen when she discovered the truth, and whether the simplicity and honesty he so admired in her would change when she learned he was a millionaire. Eduardo, for the first time, found himself vulnerable in relation to someone and knew that the love that was beginning to emerge between them would be anything but ordinary. As the days passed and the friendship between Eduardo and Camila grew, the millionaire began to face an increasing dilemma. He knew he couldn't maintain the facade of an ordinary man forever. With each conversation with Camila, with each smile she gave him, Eduardo felt more involved, but also more pressure to tell the truth. He feared that by revealing his true identity, he might lose the genuine connection he had built with her. Deep down, Eduardo wondered if Camila would see him differently when she knew he wasn't just a coffee customer, but an extremely successful businessman surrounded by wealth. One night, when leaving the cafe after a particularly engaging conversation with Camila, Eduardo decided to seek advice from Fernando, your best friend and confidant. Fernando, who knew Eduardo's luxurious life and emotional complications like no one else, was surprised to hear about the waitress who had captured the millionaire's heart. "You have to tell the truth," Fernando advised firmly. "If you want something real with her, you need to be honest. If she likes you, it will be for who you are, not what you have. But if you keep hiding it, the relationship has no chance of being authentic." Fernando's words echoed in Eduardo's mind in the following days. He knew his friend was right. With each moment spent with Camila, he felt closer to her. But he also knew that he was carrying a secret that, sooner or later, would come to light. Still, Eduardo hesitated. He didn't know how to broach the subject with Camila without it seeming like a betrayal or something calculated. After all, she had gotten used to seeing him as a simple man, someone who enjoyed coffee and casual conversations. Revealing his fortune, he feared, would completely change the dynamic between them. While Eduardo dealt with his doubts, Camila, unaware of his true identity, began to feel a stronger attraction for him. She found it funny how Eduardo appeared at the cafe almost every day, always with a word of support or an interesting story. He was different from all the men she had known. There was a simplicity about him that attracted her, a calm and security that contrasted with the chaos of her own life. However, Camila would never have imagined that the man she talked to so naturally was, in fact, a millionaire. She saw him as a potential friend, perhaps more, but without any sense of his true reality. Eduardo was torn between the desire to keep that relationship pure and the fear that his wealth would alienate Camila or, worse, transform the way she saw him. Every time he left the cafe, he promised himself that next time he would tell everything, but he never managed to. The fear of losing the simplicity and charm of that relationship made him postpone the decision. He knew the moment was coming, and that he couldn't postpone it forever, but he still felt paralyzed by the uncertainty of what would come after the revelation. One day, while they were sitting at the cafe, Camila, without realizing the weight of her words, commented on how she admired the simplicity of Eduardo's life. "You seem so peaceful, so detached from everything I see around you. It's rare to find someone like that," she said with a smile. Eduardo felt the weight of those words like a blow. Little did Camila know that he was carrying a completely different world on his shoulders, and that the Eduardo she admired was hiding a significant part of his life. He knew that, after that conversation, he could no longer delay. I needed to tell the truth. With a heavy heart, Eduardo finally made his decision. He looked at Camila, still smiling, and realized that if he wanted something real to blossom between them, he would need to take the risk. "Camila," he began, his voice serious and an expression of hesitation. "There's something I need to tell you." Eduardo's heart pounded as he prepared to tell the truth. He knew that moment could change everything, for better or for worse. And with that, he was about to reveal the secret he had been keeping since the day he met her. Eduardo, feeling the weight of responsibility in his words, took a deep breath before continuing. "Camila, I haven't been completely honest with you," he began, watching her face as it slowly closed into an expression of confusion. "I'm not exactly who you think I am. In fact, I own several companies, and I'm a millionaire." The silence that followed seemed endless. Camila stared at him, processing what she had just heard. That seemed so far from the reality she knew, so out of context with the man who was there in front of her, drinking coffee in a modest corner cafe. Camila blinked a few times, as if trying to make sure she heard correctly. "You're... what?" she asked, her voice slightly hesitant. Eduardo tried to soften the situation. "I'm a businessman. I have a few companies, and yes, financially I have a lot more than I let on." Eduardo expected that the revelation would change something instantly, perhaps that she would be surprised or, in the worst-case scenario, that she would move away. But Camila's reaction was different from what he imagined. After a brief silence, she let out a short, slightly nervous laugh and replied, "Really? I didn't expect that. But, so what?" Camila's simple and unexpected answer took Eduardo completely by surprise. He, who was prepared for a drastic reaction, for shock or rejection, didn't know how to deal with the lightness with which she handled the news. "So what?" Eduardo repeated, not believing that she was no longer affected. Camila, with a smile on her face, shook her head. "Look, Eduardo, you seem like a good person. I don't care if you have millions or if you live on minimum wage. What matters is how you treat people, and you've always treated me with respect and kindness. So, to me, that's what counts." Eduardo felt profound relief upon hearing those words. Everything he feared, the change in the way she saw him, the possibility that wealth would drive a wedge between them, seemed to disappear in that moment. He realized that Camila was, in fact, different from anyone he had ever met. She didn't care about his wealth. She didn't see it as something that defined him. For her, Eduardo was the same man who drank coffee and talked to her every day, and that was what really mattered. "You really are special," said Eduardo with a relieved smile. The revelation did not change the essence of their relationship, but it opened a new space for them to get to know each other more deeply. Now that the truth was on the table, Eduardo felt lighter, as if he no longer needed to carry the weight of the secret. Camila, in turn, continued to treat him the same way, without letting his wealth influence her perception. For her, Eduardo was still that interesting man who liked to talk about simple things in life, someone who didn't need to impress her with material goods or status. In the days following the revelation, the relationship between Eduardo and Camila blossomed naturally. They started going out to different places, not just the cafe where they met. Eduardo invited her to dinner, and Camila, always pragmatic, chose a simple restaurant, refusing the expensive places that Eduardo was used to going to. For her, what mattered was company, not luxury. Eduardo, in turn, felt that experience was changing his worldview. Alongside Camila, he began to value the simpler things in life, things that previously went unnoticed amid his luxurious routine. Still, there was a new challenge ahead. Now that the truth about his fortune had been revealed, Eduardo knew that, at some point, he would have to show Camila the world he lived in. But how would she react when coming into contact with Eduardo's social circles, where superficiality and money were always at the forefront? He was afraid that seeing this side of his life would make Camila feel out of place or uncomfortable. Even so, Eduardo was determined to integrate Camila into his life, because, more than ever, he knew that what was emerging between them was something real and special. With the relationship between Edward and Camila becoming more solid, the moment Eduardo feared so much arrived, introducing Camila to his true world. He knew that, no matter how simple she was, he couldn't keep her away from his reality of luxury, power, and prestige forever. Eduardo wanted Camila to meet his friends and family, but he was nervous that she would feel uncomfortable or judged. Determined to move forward with honesty, he invited her to an important event his family was organizing, a gala charity dinner for a humanitarian cause. The invitation was made carefully, and Camila, although surprised, accepted, knowing that this was an opportunity to see another side of Eduardo's life. On the day of the event, Eduardo sent an elegant dress for Camila. Although reluctant at first, she eventually accepted the gift, understanding that the environment required something more formal than she was used to. When Eduardo picked her up, Camila was stunning but clearly uncomfortable. He looked at her with a mixture of pride and admiration. "You look amazing," he said, trying to calm her. Camila smiled, but couldn't help but feel a little out of place. Eduardo's life was very different from hers, and she knew she would be entering an environment full of people accustomed to measuring others by money and status. However, Camila trusted Eduardo, and that made her move forward. When they arrived at the event, curious looks and some discreet whispers were soon directed at Camila. She felt the weight of eyes evaluating every detail: her appearance, her clothes, her behavior. Eduardo, noticing her discomfort, remained by her side the entire time, introducing her to friends and acquaintances naturally. "This is Camila," he said, with pride evident in his voice. But, despite Eduardo's confident posture, Camila noticed the slight condescension in some people's expressions. It was as if she didn't belong in that world, as if she were out of place amidst the opulence and glamour. During dinner, one of Eduardo's friends, Sophia, a socialite known for her luxurious life, couldn't help but make a sarcastic comment. "So, you work as a waitress?" she asked with a forced smile. Camila, who had always been firm and independent, responded with dignity, "Yes, I'm a waitress, and I'm also studying to be an interior designer. It's something I really love." The answer, although direct and honest, was met with surprised looks. For Sophia and others present, this was almost unthinkable, and the conversation continued with an awkward silence. Eduardo, next to Camila, squeezed her hand under the table, showing silent support. Eduardo felt a mixture of frustration and sadness. He knew that was the world he had grown up in, but now, next to Camila, he could see how superficial and insensitive the people around him were. He hated that she was going through this, but at the same time he admired the way Camila handled everything. Her strength and authenticity were unshakable, and this only made Eduardo fall in love with her even more. He knew that Camila wasn't there to impress anyone, and, unlike many around her, she was truthful in everything she did and said. After dinner, as they returned home, Eduardo apologized for any discomfort Camila may have felt. "I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I didn't want to hide that side of my life from you," he said, sincerely. Camila, in turn, responded with a soft smile. "I understand, Eduardo. This is your world, and I know you're not like them. I just want you to know that I don't need any of that to love you. What I feel for you has nothing to do with money or status." Her words came as a relief to Eduardo, who, for the first time, realized that, regardless of the differences between their worlds, what really mattered was what they felt for each other. The night that could have been a disaster ended up strengthening their relationship even further. Camila had faced one of the biggest challenges with confidence and dignity, and Eduardo knew that she was the person he wanted by his side. He was ready to face any judgment or criticism from his family and friends as long as he could be with her. And Camila, despite not fitting into that world of wealth and extravagance, knew that her love for Eduardo was genuine and unshakable. From that moment on, they both understood that, together, they could overcome any obstacle. Despite the previous night's success, not everyone in the circle of Edward were so willing to accept Camila. Your mother, Beatrice, always had high expectations for Eduardo's future. She imagined her son marrying someone from his social class, someone who could maintain the family legacy and strengthen their connections. Beatrice was a traditional woman, used to manipulating social events for the benefit of her family, and the idea of Eduardo having a relationship with a waitress, no matter how dignified and polite Camila was not part of her plans. When she learned about the seriousness of their relationship, Beatrice decided to act. Eduardo always had a complicated relationship with his mother. Despite loving Beatrice, he knew that she put family interests and social status above personal feelings. So, when she called him in for a private conversation, he was already expecting the confrontation. "Eduardo, we need to talk about Camila," Beatrice began bluntly. "You know she's not right for you. You can have fun, sure, but this can't be serious. You have a reputation, a legacy to protect." Eduardo, already irritated, interrupted his mother. "Camila is more than adequate, Mom. She's the most authentic person I've ever met. And I love her." The word love shocked Beatrice. She didn't expect the relationship to have reached this point. "Love?" she repeated, with a tone of disbelief. "Eduardo, you barely know her. What do you know about her life? About her family?" Beatrice continued with her speech, insisting that Eduardo was being impulsive and that he was throwing away everything they had built for the family. But Eduardo, determined, was not willing to listen any longer. "You don't know her, Mom. And to be honest, I don't care what you think about it. Camila is my choice, and nothing will change that." The discussion ended with Beatrice furious and Eduardo even more convinced that he had made the right choice. He knew that his mother would not change her mind so easily, and that, for Beatrice, status and wealth would always be priorities. This saddened him, because he wished his mother could see Camila for who she really was, a strong, hard-working and authentic woman, who made him happy in a way that no one else could. Eduardo began to mentally prepare himself for what was to come, knowing that Beatrice would not easily give up trying to separate them. Meanwhile, Camila, unaware of the extent of Eduardo's family conflicts, continued living her life in a simple and sincere way. She loved him deeply, but never wanted to be a burden to him. Sometimes, Camila wondered if she was getting in the way of Eduardo's relationship with his family, but he always reassured her, saying that she was the most important thing in his life right now. However, she knew that, at some point, she would have to face criticism and disapproval from people like Beatrice. Eduardo decided to tell Camila the truth about the conversation with his mother. "I know my mother will try to oppose our relationship," he said, during a walk in the park. "She has a very strict view of what proper is, but I want you to know that I don't care about that. How I feel about you is far greater than any expectations she might have." Camila was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. She knew that facing Eduardo's mother's disapproval would be difficult, but she was willing to fight for that love that, for her, was true. In the days that followed, Beatrice tried in various ways to influence Eduardo, even suggesting that he travel abroad to think clearly. She even introduced other women, suitors who, according to her, would fit better into her life. But Eduardo stood firm. He knew what he wanted, and he wouldn't let his mother or anyone else take him away from Camila. He felt that love was rare, and he was willing to face any obstacle, even if it meant going against his own family. As time went by, pressure from his family, Edward, especially from his mother, began to increase. Beatrice, he could not accept the fact that his son, heir to a vast empire, was getting involved in such a serious way with a woman who, in his eyes, was not worthy of his position. She began to involve other family members in her attempt to dissuade Eduardo, trying to show him what she considered to be the logic behind his arguments. Beatrice talked about strategic alliances, the family's prestige, and how Eduardo was wasting his life with someone who wasn't up to his standard. For her, Camila was a threat to the family legacy. Eduardo, although always respectful towards his mother, began to move away from her emotionally. He saw more and more clearly that his family's world, which had always valued money and appearances, was superficial. With Camila, Eduardo found something he had never felt before. Pure love, without ulterior motives, without expectations. For Camila, Eduardo was just himself without the millionaire label, and that was what he valued most. But the external pressure began to weigh on Eduardo, who found himself constantly torn between his love for Camila and his desire to maintain some kind of peace with his family. Beatriz didn't give up. In a last attempt to convince his son, he organized a family dinner, inviting Eduardo and Camila under the pretext of resolving things once and for all. Eduardo hesitated to accept the invitation, but Camila, always sensible, encouraged him to go. "I want you to have peace with your family," she said. "I don't want to be the reason for any distance between you." Eduardo knew that the situation would not be easy, but he admired Camila's maturity in wanting to face the conflict in an open and honest way. He decided that they would go together, ready to face whatever came. At dinner, the tension was palpable. Beatriz tried to maintain a cordial tone, but it was clear that she did not approve of the relationship. She made indirect comments about Camila's lifestyle, suggesting that Eduardo deserved someone who could accompany him in his life of luxury. Camila, always dignified, responded respectfully but firmly. "I love Eduardo for the man he is, not for what he has. That will never change, and I hope you can see that one day." Camila's answer was direct, but full of elegance, something that surprised everyone at the table, including Beatriz. Eduardo, realizing that the moment had arrived, decided to put an end to the discussion. "Mom, I respect you, but I need to be clear. I chose Camila. She is the person who makes me happy, and I will not give up on that because of expectations or conventions. I want you to be part of my life, but if that's not possible because of my relationship, then I'll have to accept that our relationship will be different from now on." Beatriz, shocked by her son's firmness, remained silent. She never imagined that Eduardo would be able to position himself so clearly, and that made her realize that he was, in fact, serious. The dinner ended with a tense atmosphere, but Eduardo felt great inner peace. He had made his choice, and he was prepared to deal with the consequences. As he left his mother's house, he looked at Camila and, holding her hand, said, "Now I know I made the right choice. You are what really matters." Camila, moved, knew that from that moment on, both would be united not only by the love they shared, but by the strength they had found in each other to face any obstacle. From that night on, Eduardo knew he was ready to face the future with Camila, even if it meant giving up certain family expectations. He didn't need external approval because he had found something more valuable, true love, which didn't depend on riches or appearances. Now he was free to live the life he always wanted, with the woman who made him feel complete. With Eduardo's decision made and the relationship between him and Camila stronger than ever, the two began planning a life together. Eduardo felt that, after facing his mother's resistance and overcoming the prejudices of his social circle, he was ready to take the next step. He knew Camila was the woman he wanted to share his future with, not just because of the love he felt, but because of the way she transformed him. By his side, Eduardo began to value the simple things in life. He learned to see the world in a more authentic way and to disconnect from the superficiality that previously surrounded him. Despite the decision to live together, Eduardo and Camila knew that the journey would not be easy. Although Eduardo was ready to move on, the conflict with his mother, Beatriz, it was still a shadow over their relationship. Beatriz, even after dinner, continued to believe that Eduardo was making a mistake by getting involved with Camila. She avoided family gatherings and made it clear that, as long as Eduardo was with Camila, her relationship with her son would be distant. This tension caused Eduardo pain, but he was determined to keep his choice firm. Camila, realizing the emotional toll this had on Eduardo, always tried to be a source of support and understanding. At the same time, Camila continued her own personal journey. She finally managed to save enough money to start an interior design course, a dream that was getting closer and closer to becoming a reality. Eduardo, although he wanted to help her financially, respected Camila's desire to achieve her goals on her own. "I want to do this for myself," she said firmly, and Eduardo couldn't be more proud. Seeing Camila determined to pursue her dreams only reinforced what he already knew. She was the right person to be by his side. Camila wanted to be independent and, although she knew that Eduardo could offer everything she needed, her fighting spirit and self-determination would always prevail. As Eduardo and Camila built a routine together, he began to slowly introduce her to his closest friends, those he knew could see her beyond the labels and stereotypes. Fernando, her best friend, who had given wise advice from the beginning, was one of the first to meet Camila in a more relaxed atmosphere. For Fernando, who was always by Eduardo's side, it was clear that his friend had changed for the better. "She's incredible, Eduardo," commented Fernando after the meeting. "I can see how good she is for you." These words meant a lot to Eduardo, who now felt that he was finally integrating Camila into his life fully. The two began to make plans for the future. Camila dreamed of opening her own interior design company one day, and Eduardo, passionate about her entrepreneurial vision, encouraged her at every step. Meanwhile, he dedicated himself to balancing his professional life, managing his business with a new perspective. Financial success was still important, but now he saw his life in a more human light. Eduardo wanted to build something lasting, not just in terms of material wealth, but in terms of a meaningful life with Camila. As the months passed, Eduardo and Camila realized that, despite their initial differences, their lives were harmonizing naturally. The social and financial barriers that, at first, seemed insurmountable, began to disappear as they both discovered that love, trust, and mutual respect were stronger than any external expectations. Together, they were building a new life, a life that honored their differences, but was fueled by a love that united them in a deep and true way. With the relationship between Eduardo and Camila stabilized and the two already accustomed to life together, something unexpected happened that changed the course of the relationship between Eduardo and his mother, Beatriz. After months of silence and distance, Beatriz began to realize the consequences of her separation from her son. She had always been a proud woman, used to maintaining control over her family, but now she felt an immense emptiness at being away from Eduardo. The house, once full of family gatherings and parties, seemed cold and lonely without her son's presence, and Beatriz began to question her decisions. Everything changed when Beatriz, unintentionally, met Camila in an unlikely situation. Camila was working on an interior design project as part of her course, and coincidentally, the place where she was renovating was close to a cafe that Beatriz frequented. The two crossed paths when Camila was finishing the work and, despite the initial embarrassment, Camila greeted her with respect and serenity. Beatriz, initially hesitant, was surprised by the mature and professional way in which Camila handled the situation. She expected a resentful, perhaps spiteful woman, but what she found was someone who handled the tension calmly and politely. In the days that followed, Beatriz couldn't stop thinking about that meeting. For the first time, she began to see Camila in a new light, not as the waitress who wasn't good enough for Eduardo, but as a strong, determined, and independent woman. Something began to change inside her. Beatriz was always driven by her social expectations, but she began to realize that her son's happiness was at stake, and that perhaps she had been unfair to Camila. After much reflection, Beatriz decided that she needed to take the first step towards reconnecting with Eduardo and, finally, getting to know the woman he loved better. One afternoon, Eduardo received an unexpected call from his mother. "Eduardo, I'd like to talk," Beatriz said, with a soft tone he hadn't heard in a while. He accepted the invitation, still with a certain suspicion, but willing to listen to what she had to say. At the meeting, Beatriz surprised Eduardo by admitting that perhaps she had been too harsh. "I was thinking more about what people would say than about your happiness," she confessed sincerely. Eduardo, with an open heart, listened to every word and, although the resentment was still present, he felt that his mother was, for the first time, trying to understand his choice. After that conversation, Beatriz asked to meet Camila. Eduardo was surprised, but saw it as a positive step. Camila, always willing to face situations with maturity, accepted the invitation. The meeting was tense at first, but quickly became a frank conversation. Beatriz, with teary eyes, apologized for having been so prejudiced and rigid. "I was wrong," she said. "I should never have judged you without knowing you." Camila, with her characteristic kindness, accepted the apology with humility. She knew how much that moment meant to Eduardo and was willing to let go of any hurt for the good of their relationship. From that moment on, family dynamics began to change. Although it wasn't easy for Beatriz to put aside years of prejudice, she was willing to try. Little by little, she came to see Camila as a capable woman, worthy of being at her son's side. She recognized that behind her simplicity was a strength that Beatriz had never considered before. The time they spent together was fundamental for Beatriz to realize that the love between Eduardo and Camila was true and did not depend on social rules or expectations that she had built. This reconciliation brought peace to Edward. Seeing his mother accepting, albeit little by little, the love he felt for Camila was something he hadn't imagined possible months before. Now, Eduardo felt like the pieces of his life were finally falling into place. Her mother, even with all her reservations, was learning to value Camila for who she was, and not for the social position she occupied. Eduardo knew that the road would still be long, but, for the first time, he felt that he could build true harmony between his family and the love of his life. With the reconciliation between Eduardo and his mother, and the gradual acceptance of Camila in the family circle, the couple's life began to take a new direction. They were stronger than ever, and the love they built, despite the difficulties and differences, had become unbreakable. Camila, now graduated in interior design, started working in her own business, and Eduardo, always by her side, encouraged her to grow and make her dreams come true. For him, seeing Camila prosper in her career was one of the greatest sources of pride, as she remained true to herself at every step. Over the years, Eduardo and Camila began to live in a harmony that many believed to be unlikely. The fusion between the different worlds they came from was indeed an achievement. They learned to value both the luxuries that Eduardo was accustomed to and the simplicities that Camila always valued. It was common for the two of them to go out for coffee in modest places, like the cafe where they met on weekends, and at other times to participate in important events in Eduardo's business. In both environments, they felt comfortable because, for them, the place didn't matter. What mattered was being together. Over time, Beatriz, although still maintaining some of her reservations, grew closer to Camila. She started inviting her to family dinners and social events, and, little by little, the relationship between the two evolved. Beatriz recognized that her son's happiness was above any social convention, and although she still didn't fully understand the simple life that Camila valued, she came to respect it. Camila, in turn, maintained her respectful attitude, always understanding Beatriz's space, without trying to please her beyond what was necessary. Both found a balance, and Eduardo felt relieved to see that the most important women in his life were at peace. With Camila's business growing and Eduardo finding new satisfaction in his work, the two began planning their future together. They talked about marriage and children, but without rushing. Camila wanted everything to happen naturally, without the weight of expectations or external pressure, and Eduardo agreed. He was willing to build a life that reflected the values they both shared: simplicity, honesty, and genuine love. On a quiet afternoon, as they walked through the park where they often met, Eduardo asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Camila, will you marry me?" The request was simple, without the glamour that many would imagine for a millionaire. Eduardo wanted that moment to reflect the essence of their relationship, something authentic and pure. Camila, thrilled, said yes without hesitation. For her, the love they built was worth more than any material wealth. What mattered was the respect, mutual support, and partnership they had cultivated over time. And there, in that peaceful park, without witnesses or major events, they committed to living the rest of their lives together. The wedding, planned to be an intimate ceremony, was a celebration of everything they had overcome. Few friends and family were present, but for Eduardo and Camila, that was enough. The ceremony represented the union of two worlds, of two stories that, against all expectations, had intertwined in a profound and true way. As they exchanged vows, they both knew they were ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. The love they shared was the solid foundation on which they would build everything. The future looked promising. Eduardo and Camila, now married, were ready to face life together, in a simple but meaningful way. They knew that the journey would not always be easy, but with the love they felt, they were prepared to overcome any obstacle. Eduardo, who previously lived a life marked by luxury and superficiality, found in Camila the true meaning of happiness. Camila, in turn, discovered that love didn't need to be perfect, just true. And so, united by destiny, they moved forward, ready to live a future full of love and complicity.